Kia ora koutou, katoa koe Daniels tōku ingoa. I am the president and co-chair of NZNO, the New Zealand Nurses Organisation, representing 61,000 nurses, midwives, healthcare assistants and kaiwhina who work in public, private, primary and aged care health sectors. I'm also an emergency nurse in the tertiary level care hospital. I just want to thank you for all those involved in giving the women of our country a voice and filling the void of fair, transparent and democratic government process. The fact that we are still fighting against gender discrimination and for equity in all aspects of our lives is a condemnation of successive governments who have failed every woman in our past, present and future. NZNO believes that pay equity legislation and framework must be fit for purpose to give effect to our Maranga Mai strategic plan to fix pay and conditions equitably across every sector of the health system to meet nurses' values and expectations. NZNO has consistently called for equal pay and conditions for every nurse everywhere for many years, based on the irrefutable fact that our professional, legislative, ethical and cultural standards of practice are the same no matter where we work. I remember well when we won pay equity in 2023. I was proud of what our union had achieved. But my remaining non-Te Whatu Ora colleagues have had pay equity ripped from them in the most underhanded and unethical way imaginable. The coalition government's change to pay equity legislation has created division within our profession by increasing pay inequity and compounding gender discrimination. Non-Te Whatu Ora nurses now earn 24% less than nurses working in the public sector. Further, maintaining pay equity, hard won over 6 years of mahi, is no longer protected for Te Whatu Ora nurses under the new legislation. So what does that mean? We are being dragged back to the dark ages where women have few rights or protections equal to that of a man. The impetus for these changes was to save billions of dollars on the backs of women, backs already bent to breaking point with unsafe workloads and unsafe staffing in the public sector and the primary sector and the aged sector that is getting worse every day. As highly educated, skilled and knowledgeable professional nurses, we have choices and we are making them. Nurses are leaving the country in their thousands, leaving our public health system in peril, and those who need our care waiting and suffering avoidable harm. All of which is bringing shame on our nation that once led the fight for women's rights to be equal internationally. Our NZNO members are calling for change. Government must restore and improve pay equity legislation and fund pay equity settlements to correct gender-based discrimination and uphold the mana of the past, present, future women of our country. Thank you.
Kia ora, Anne.
Kia ora.
Lynn, did you want to ask us something? Or
Yes. Actually, Anne, you've very eloquently answered my question, because it was going to be about the ongoing impacts for members in our health system. And after I put my hand up, you did actually go into it. But I would also be very interested to know around the resourcing, because we've had a number of submitters who've talked about the time, the money that unions in particular and employers have put into that. And I think you said that the resourcing that was made available was a challenge. And that's retrospectively. And if you could just make a wee comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Lynn, but I think that we have Glenda in the room who would be much more able to answer that question, if you don't mind.
No problem.
Kira, I just wondered if, Kerri, you wanted to talk to the other impacts on our, Māori and iwi communities first before I do more of the technical stuff. Is that okay with everybody?
Yes. Kia ora, Glenda. Kia ora koutou katoa, he uria hau Ngāti Kahungunu Ngātai, ko Kerri Nuku tuku ingoa, he kai whakahaere tōku tangata he kai te Ake Aotearoa, the New Zealand Nurses Organisation. It's no surprise we've been on this battle for a lot longer than most other nurses, because the rights of Māori women and Māori nurses has been completely undermined throughout the health system. History goes back, and it eloquently talks about the way that Māori women have been treated throughout history. Akaniki, one of our most famous Māori nurses, never paid for the work that she did, but the expectation was that all of what she was doing was in consideration of bringing up Māori to a standard of non-Māori. So her work was considered to be that of the angels, as opposed to recognised for the skill that she brought. And that's no different with Māori nurses today. I mean, we have been on this battle for many, many years. And if I only look back to 2008, and when our Māori nurses identified the issue around the gap between what their nurses within hospital were getting paid compared to nurses that work with Māori and iwi providers. Back then, the gap in pay difference was 30%. It wasn't just about the pay, it was about recognition of the work and contributions that Māori nurses add to the community. And despite the select committee, which I think gave some quite explicit directions for the government, none of those were addressed. And of course, now we've got a workforce back in 2013 that was 8% of a total nursing workforce population. And now, without any investment from any governments, we remain 7.4 of a total nursing workforce, with internationally qualified nurses almost at 50% of that. So not only have we seen a shift in change in culture, we have seen the lack of value that Māori nurses or governments tend to invest in Māori nursing. There is no workforce strategy, there is no plan. We've tried to look at pay parity as an approach to get these nurses that work within providers up to a standard. However, that was getting us nowhere as well. And when governments choose to not talk to the issues or address the issues or include them in any strategy, our next approach, was to take a pay equity claim, so that not only could we have the gender discrimination addressed, but also the ethnic discrimination that exists addressed, so that the value of the work that Māori nurses actually do was going to be recognised. And we don't have to look far. The Y2575 recommendations clearly set out the discrimination, both structurally within the system, that was stopping our nurses from being recognised and funded. So, as Anne had said, this overnight decision, which did not include and breached the rights of our treaty rights, meant that these nurses will continue to stay in the dark ages forever, because nobody will address this issue of pay parity. It's a struggle for mainstream women. It's even double a struggle for Māori. So if we're going to look at investment, let's look at the impact that this has had on Māori communities, on Māori nurses, and how much that has significantly set us back. Māori nurses are often the role model for others within their families to step up and become nurses. Why would we even bother? That's what many nurses are saying. Why would we bother when we're getting treated poorly, even more poorly than women in general? Glenda, I'll hand to you.
Kia ora, thank you, Kerri. That's great. So the question that I think Lynn asked before was on the resourcing. So I know you've read our submission, so you'll see that we were involved in all 12 of our claims. You heard us speak about the care and support one last week, week before, and that was 3 claims that we were involved in. We had 9 others raised and underway. The 2 most advanced was Plunkett and hospice for nurses. So painfully, the resourcing of pay equity claims, especially from the union perspective, is a real struggle, because there's also a struggle in terms of having the opportunity to train other people in terms of the process, and the unions themselves are actually resource poor. So you couple that up with the employers who, at least one of our claims, sexual wellbeing Aotearoa, they were extremely challenged by our claim, not because they didn't believe it was fair or reasonable, but that they just said there's kind of like only 2 people there working in HR. They had to do all the day-to-day stuff, and how on earth would they fit in progressing a pay equity claim at the same time? So we found this frequently. The Plunkett claim revolved around only 2 people who work with us. Again, only 2 people from the union as well. So, and we did rely heavily on the Public Services Commission, the Pay Equity Task Force people who helped both parties. The resources were amazing, as was the assistance and support. I think I saw Amy Ross lurking around somewhere on the panel as well. She was really helpful to us, both parties, in terms of training in the resources using the Te Arawaru tool, those kind of things. So overall, in each claim required at least, I was trying to work it out the other day, at least about 3 or 4 hours a week. And so if you add all that together, weekly meetings just to talk about what we are doing, let alone doing the work, all the interviews that we've repeated and repeated. So picking up on something that Kerri said, for us, in terms of the New Zealand Nurses Organisation, what to us seemed a nonsense actually was the fact that we had to repeat raising claims for every different sort of discipline of nursing, if you like. As far as we were concerned, we proved our case with the DHB/Te Whatu Ora nurses claim. Nurses are all similarly qualified. They just choose to work in a different practice setting. And so having completed that first pay equity claim, we should have been able to just adjust the outcomes to take into account the different settings, particularly the different settings, the overlay of the bicultural issues that we were pleased to see did go some way towards assessing in the Te Arawaru tool. But, you know, like in terms of our claims, we just thought it was a nonsense that, having proven the case once for around 40,000 nurses in this country, why did we have to repeat over and over again for all the rest of the nurses, regardless of their practice setting? So yeah, resourcing was a real struggle, and it seemed like we were, you know, like women often have to do, is continually prove themselves over and over again, whereas in fact the assessments, and the ones we did do for Plunkett and hospice, already showed us that the nursing roles were totally comparable, you know, in terms of just a strictly mathematical, more scientific approach. It showed us that they matched up to their sisters who worked for Te Whatu Ora, doing the same or similar work with the same responsibilities, the same skills, the same effort. And, you know, the only thing that was a bit different would be the working conditions, but on balance, they were the same or similar work. So that's why we're really frustrated, because it has created a double level in New Zealand of nurses who do the same work being paid extremely differently.
Linda, Kerri, and Anne, we have one more question, and I will ask Jane Marilyn if she would like to ask a question.
Laura, thank you very much for your submission. I continue along this way a little bit, but I'm really happy to have it an estimate in writing. I notice in Law News, both Hospice and Plunkett gave a figure to assess how much staff time, etc., they thought they had spent on their claims. And Tracy Martin from the Rest Home proprietors told us they thought it was in the vicinity of about $500,000. So I wonder if you can, if you feel in a position to put a kind of a ballpark figure on what it had cost you to negotiate in good faith, to the point where all the claims were lost in the legislation. If it would just be a meaningless figure, then you can just tell me that, and that's fine.
Yeah, I hadn't actually turned the time into dollars, but you know, I would say that it was the equivalent if we took into account if you just talk about union resource to it, would be, you know, the equivalent of a full-time salary. You know, I'd say across all of our claims, the fact was that it wasn't a full-time role, it was part-time, but I think in actual fact, if you add the whole 9 claims plus our involvement in the care and support one, it would be at least a full-time salary. Yeah, that'd be a really interesting exercise, Marilyn. I'd be quite keen to figure that one out a bit more specifically and let the committee know, because I think it was quite huge, really, when you know, just add, you forget the minutes. If we were accountants or whatever, we'd be clocking them in from my memories years ago, every 15 minutes you'd block in how much you were, you know, spending for which client and so on. Yeah.
Can I just add a comment to that? I think it's could be an easy enough exercise to look at the staff time, but our organisation runs on volunteer time. So the engagement with Māori communities would something that would be really difficult to factor in. But with our engagement, we spend a lot of time communicating and engaging with members so that they are really clear about the process, but also so that we can recognise what is a value add that it takes being a Māori nurse within that sector as well. So I think while some of it can be quantified, it's that unwritten engagement, or that would be really difficult. But the volunteer time is huge.